lady was sitting at her workstation, staring at the empty screen in front of her. For months, she had tried to generate a new book concept, but nothing had stuck. The woman sighed as she sipped her coffee. At that very moment, inspiration hit her. This was a disturbing tale of a lady being stalked by an unknown man. The main character would have paranoia, wondering if anyone else is around. The woman's excitement about the concept translated into rapid typing, with the words coming easily to her. She found herself becoming emotionally invested in the tale as she continued to write. She was curious to find out what would happen next and how the main character would deal with the looming danger. The woman was typing, but the sensation that she was being watched persisted. She swiveled in her seat, but saw nobody around. Paranoia, she thought, and shook her head, returning her attention to her computer. She had no idea that her tale would soon become a reality. The lady persisted in penning her novel despite an unsettling sense of being watched. She felt like she was being trailed, but every time she turned, no one was there. After a long day of writing, she was walking to her car when she sensed someone following her. As she turned around, she saw nobody. Her pulse was racing with anxiety, and she accelerated her pace. She couldn't help but glance back over her shoulder as she unlocked her vehicle and climbed inside. She became aware of a shadowy figure observing her. She saw no details, but she knew it was the same ghost that had been following her around. The woman, trembling with fear, started her vehicle and raced home. She attempted to convince herself that the figure was a product of her imagination, a response to the pressure of finishing her novel. But she sensed there was something awry at her core. Someone or something was following her, and it was growing closer. The lady was so curious about the mysterious figure that had been following her that she started doing some digging. She scoured the web for hours, searching for any scrap of data that might lead to a positive identification. Unsolved murders in the region were what she found out about. All the victims were young ladies, like her main character. As she read more, she became more and more persuaded that the person following her was the same one who had committed the murders. She spent countless hours reading through police records and news stories as part of her investigation. However, the more she learned, the more certain she became that her life was in imminent peril. The person was still at large, and another attack was imminent. The woman, terrified and isolated, started to feel as though she were a character in her own novel. She was no longer able to differentiate between what was true and what was made up. The lady was settling in for a night of writing when she suddenly became aware of a disturbance in the living room. She stopped moving, her pulse racing. Were you referring to the number? Had he located her at last? She reached for a thick volume on her desk, picked it up with trembling hands, and tiptoed nervously toward the exit. A dark figure was skulking around her living room, and she peeped around the corner to see who it was. She threw the book at the figure reflexively, hoping to divert his attention long enough for her to make her getaway. The statue took a direct blow to the head from the book and toppled a lamp as he staggered backwards. To her dismay, she recognized the man as he turned to face her from her investigation. That element was fatal. The victim shrieked and tried to escape through the door, but her killer caught her before she could get far. Her screams were muffled as he placed a hand over her lips. "You shouldn't have written about me," he hissed, his breath hot on her cheeks. "At this point, I must stifle your voice." The victim put up a valiant fight, but her attacker was too powerful. At that moment, she realized it was her last. Then, unexpectedly, she felt a surge of power. She then fled away after kicking the murderer in the groin. With her pulse racing, she flung it open and ran out into the darkness. She ran, her mind racing with the realization that she had to find a means to stop the murderer before he could strike again. This lady knew she couldn't report this crime to the authorities. She didn't want to place her loved ones in danger because she knew they wouldn't believe her story. That's when she made the executive decision to act unilaterally. For days, she deliberated over her next move. She looked into the killer's routines, actions, and routines. She realized that she had to anticipate his next move if she wanted any chance of catching him. At last, she devised a strategy. She planned on luring the murderer to her home, where she would ambush him. She locked all the doors and windows and installed surveillance cams to monitor the area. She felt a sense of peace overtake her as she waited for the killer to come. She finally felt empowered after what seemed like weeks. In this new role, she was neither prey nor protector. The woman was prepared when the murderer came. After he was safely inside the home, she pounced. She pounced on him with a kitchen knife and slashed at him furiously. The killer, however, was powerful, and he battled back. As they fought for dominance, the two slammed into various pieces of furnishings and the walls. The police swarmed in the door just as the woman gave up hope of winning the battle. They had been keeping an eye on her home and caught the whole thing on surveillance footage. Once the murderer was apprehended, everyone hailed the lady as a hero. She had successfully thwarted a murderer and established her superiority over any fictitious heroine. Even though she was now secure, she knew that the terror and anxiety she had experienced during those weeks would never leave her. It was difficult for the lady to get back to her regular routine after the incident. Constantly fearing that her assailant would return, she suffered recurring dreams and slept with one eye open. She was also troubled by feelings of remorse. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was her fault that she and her family were in peril because she had written about the killer. The woman, despite her apprehension and feelings of guilt, resolved to assist others by sharing her story. She decided to start telling her tale through writing in the hopes that it would help others going through the same things. Putting her thoughts on paper helped her recover, and it did the same for others who had gone through comparable things. The woman understood the potential for her tale to encourage and uplift others. As a writer, she refined her skills by becoming more conscientious. She was well aware of the impact her writing could have on others and committed to doing so ethically. The ordeal only made the lady more resilient and determined. She had conquered her anxieties and was now prepared for whatever else life threw at her. The woman had forgotten about her encounter with the murderer, and she had gone on with her life in the years since. Her subsequent works were all huge successes, so she kept at it. But the events left an indelible mark on her, and she never stopped being on guard. At one point, while returning to her vehicle after a book signing, she felt a hand on her shoulder. When she whirled around, she saw a man standing behind her, the shadow of his hood covering his face. The woman stood motionless for a second, her pulse racing. But then she recalled her past hardships and realized she was prepared for whatever lay ahead. The question, "Who are you?" came out of her mouth in a firm, confident tone. The man advanced, allowing the lady her first glimpse of his visage. It was a familiar visage, but not the murderer's. It was a man's face, a man who had been moved by her tale and whom she had helped with his writing. "I wish to thank you," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I wanted to let you know that your work got me through a very difficult period in my life." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she embraced the man tightly. Everything she had been through up until that point had paid off, she realized at that instant. The greatest reward of all was that she had been able to use her experiences to assist other people. The woman recognized as she walked away that this was not the end of her tale. There was still so much she wanted to say to the world through her writing. Also, she had confidence in her own resilience, knowing that she could handle any adversity that came her way.